All right, so I've been talking about trust and the importance of looking at an identity's trust over time and not just at the moment of authentication. I wanted to actually visually show you what I mean and how that can happen, how that can, essentially be implemented in an environment um, using existing architecture. Okay, so just going from left to right, starting at the top here, we're just going to break this down into bits, all right? So this is how you would evaluate and observe trust of an identity through time. So I standing for identity, at the beginning of any session, there's authentication, right? So that identity is going to authenticate into the environment, into the network. And in this scenario, since we're paying attention to time-based trust, right at the moment of authentication, the clock starts ticking. And we start paying attention to trust at that exact moment of authentication. That is when a timeline begins for that identity. So even just right there at the beginning, this very first part, that's already different from how we currently see identity. And we currently see it as just authentication. Identity shows up, authenticates, comes into the environment, comes into the network. And unless something happens, there is no timeline. We look at the timeline after the fact, right? But unless an event occurs, a deviation, behavior, we're not paying any attention to continuity through time, right? So this model is suggesting that you start right at authentication, measuring time, paying attention to time, including silent moments, including when there is no data or there is no event. So with this model, we're seeing silence itself as an event. And that matters because, that is what you see in between these individual dots. And these individual dots represent, say, events, say, signals, right? To be more technical, identity signals, from providers like Okta, Entra. And these signals represent the presence of an identity. So that could be MFA is triggered. That could be a login, successful login, password reset. These are all identity events that can be found in any log from any IDP. So this is based on data that we already have, right? Nothing new has to be introduced or added to the stack or added to your architecture for this model to work. But we take this existing data in these logs, sign-ins, verification that identity is present. And instead of having those events being individual, separate, isolated from each other, they're connected. And you now have this sort of graph. You now have this decay curve, really what it is. And say, this event causes trust to go downward. Say this is just like the lapse of time. Say this account was inactive for 6 hours, And so this model sees that as decay. Trust is going downward until a verification event, a successful login. That account is present again. So trust is going back up. And what this creates is just a timeline, a full story of the identity session, of how trust is moving over time. You get to see movement of an identity, which is really key when you think about threat actors leveraging persistence in environments, just sitting in an environment, right? Acting normal. If we're able to see movement, if we're able to see, because it's essentially you can repeat this process, just this part too, of drawing this out. And you can repeat that over days, months, weeks. This X represents just the end of the session, right? Like say the session expires or it's terminated, right? But for this identity, we can have this, mapped out. Each session is mapped out, and that can contribute to what I refer to as a time signature, which is essentially just the rhythm, the typical rhythm of an identity based on multiple timelines, right? And that could be done over days, weeks, or months. And so we can have established time signatures of every identity in our environment. We can see how it's moving. We can see how its presence is showing up, right? And then that can further strengthen our security, our AI-powered security, to understand when deviations are occurring, when risk is occurring, before there's an event, before something happens. You can see it coming. So how does that intelligence occur? How do we actually quantify this? We quantify it through scoring trust. So this timeline takes, right, the curve here, the trajectory, because we're connecting these previously separate points, events, with time, through time. And so you're able to actually quantify that through a trust scoring engine. And what this engine essentially is just applying decay. It's applying a decay rate, which is just based on the passage of time, right? And so we're able to score trust through this. When it drops from the beginning of the session, the user is away for 6 hours, or the account's inactive for 6 hours, trust is going down. The scoring engine is scoring that as the third hour passes, the fourth hour passes. When we get to 6 hours, that the scoring engine has determined that trust dropped to say, 40 or something, if it's 0 to 100, right? And then the scoring engine determines that trust increases, the score increases, say to 98, once that user has come back to their machine after 6 hours and is logged in. Okay, they're back. Trust score goes up. So you can get these different quantities of trust, measurements of trust, just by using simple math and taking the existing logs that are in your environment. And then that becomes intelligence. That becomes proactive insight that you can then feed down into your SIMs, your identity governance, the rest of your stack, to really get a holistic picture of what's happening with identities in your environment. So that's essentially how time-based trust works in a more complete demonstration. But I'll do more on these later. If you have any questions, would love to hear in the comments, and any thoughts as well. But yeah, this can happen in any environment. It's vendor agnostic. It does not matter which identity provider you use. We all have to log in. All of these logs exist anywhere that identity data exists. So this is free to do. So yeah.